Just sign it, she said, standing over me like a prosecutor with a closing argument, her tone sharp enough to cut steel. It's not a divorce. It's just convenience. You'll still have access, just not control. The papers landed on my desk with a flick of her wrist. Neat. Clean. Practiced. She'd rehearsed this, probably in that same smug tone she used when correcting waiters, or when reminding me that this century doesn't need your little rituals, Paul. Her lawyer sat 2 feet away, legs crossed, tapping some overpriced pen on his clipboard like he was already billing by the hour. Young. Polished. Definitely not old enough to remember dial-up internet. His tie screamed try hard. I looked up from the document and met her eyes. Her mouth smiled, but her pupils were hard, tiny, gleaming dots. She was already celebrating. If you love me, she said again, this time softer. Sign it. I stared at the page. Then sign my name. Slowly. Clearly. There, I said. You got what you wanted. I stood, pushed the chair in quietly, and walked out of the room. Behind me, her lawyer chuckled. Well, that went easier than expected. Susan laughed. Told you he'd fold. Their glasses clinked. A toast, maybe. To her freedom. To my humiliation. What they didn't notice, what they never bothered to notice, was the second sheet of paper I pulled from the lower drawer on my way out. Identical formatting. Identical header. Except it wasn't their document. It was mine. Same signature. Very different terms. If this opening caught your attention, consider subscribing. Over 90% of our listeners never do, and every new subscriber pushes our team to keep crafting stories like this one. I walked through the hallway I built with my own hands. Each floorboard sanded and varnished during that winter when Susan was off networking in wine country. The same wine country where she met Mr. Clipboard. She never really knew the house. She lived in it like a hotel guest, rearranging furniture, complaining about shadows. By the time I reached the garage, the signed document was in a sealed envelope, tucked into a courier bag I'd prepared 3 days ago. A few clicks on the dashboard of the car. GPS rerouted to a location I never told her about. I wasn't running. I was delivering. See, while she was busy playing queen of the castle, I'd been restoring a different kingdom. Not a fantasy. Not revenge show. Just precision. The kind of planning you only learn when you've been the cleanup guy. Because Susan never knew who she married. She thought she married a carpenter who got lucky flipping some commercial lots in his 50s. What she never asked, what she never cared enough to ask, was what I did before that. She heard contractor and assumed manual labor. She never read between the lines on my tax returns. Never asked why I had regular calls with someone named Elaine who wasn't on my contacts list. She never questioned why I kept a locked file cabinet labeled Denver Holdings when we'd never lived in Colorado. And she never read the footer on the power of attorney form. Because had she done that, had she taken 2 seconds to flip the damn page, she might have seen the clause I wrote 7 years ago. The one designed for this exact moment. By the time they'd opened their wine, I was already 3 counties away. I stopped at a small rest area overlooking a frozen lake, lit a cigarette I hadn't touched in 6 months, and laughed. Not because I'd won, because they still thought the game had just started. Susan's phone buzzed so violently on the nightstand that it knocked over her lavender oil diffuser, her latest anxiety remedy. She groaned, face still pressed into the silk pillow she'd special ordered from France, and blindly swiped at the screen. 7 missed calls. 1 text from her lawyer. Call me. Urgent. She blinked, annoyed. Dylan was dramatic by nature. He once called her at 3 a.m. because a time-sensitive client contract had a typo in the footer. She hit call anyway, just to shut him up. He picked up on the first ring. Susan, he whispered, breathless. I ran a background check. I had to. She rolled her eyes, sitting up, comforter falling off one shoulder. On Paul. He's just an old contractor with a chip on his shoulder and a pension. What? Did he build a shed under an alias? There was silence on the line. And not the guilty kind. The terrified kind. No, he's not. Susan, you need to look at his records. Not just his old jobs. What he's been doing with your accounts. She sat still. What are you talking about? I emailed it. Check your inbox. Just look. And Susan. He hesitated. You need to ask yourself, who did you marry? She opened her email. There it was, background packet, Paul T. Inside, a single PDF. Page 1 was an employment summary. Not a carpenter. Not even close. Corporate recovery consultant. Registered with 3 national firms. Specialist in asset protection, trust restructuring, and forensic dissolution planning during hostile financial events. Translation? He was the guy companies called when they were about to get ripped apart. and needed to make sure the important pieces didn't bleed out with the vultures. She blinked, scrolled further. 10 pages of corporate filings. 8 shell companies. 3 advisory boards. 1 flagged security clearance. Her own name appeared on page 8, right beside a list of account permissions he'd already revoked. Her mouth went dry. Wait, this is wrong, she said. He fixed bathrooms for 3 years. I saw the invoices. Dylan sighed. Yeah, you saw what he wanted you to see. You really thought that man didn't know what he was doing with those forms. Her heart thudded. He never even used jargon. He didn't talk like. Because people like him don't need to. That's what makes them terrifying. You're dealing with someone who doesn't just hide money. He hides reasons. She stood, robe slipping from her shoulder. How long? I don't know. But his last contract ended 5 years ago. Same year he met you, right? Her legs gave out. She sat on the edge of the bed, numb. So what are you saying? That he planned this from the beginning? No. I'm saying he prepared for this from the beginning. Big difference. Susan opened her banking app. Her eyes darted to the joint savings. Still visible. Still normal. She breathed a shaky sigh. Until she tapped to view recent changes. Access revoked. Joint owner, 32 days ago. Notification deferred by trustee. Her thumb trembled. She scrolled. A note at the bottom. Her discretion clause. Alert to second party, suspended for 30 days. Dylan's voice returned, lower now. He knew Susan. He waited. And he didn't just react. He architected this. She stood slowly and crossed the room to the mirror. She looked like a woman in control. Glossy hair, silk robe, manicured nails. But her reflection looked like a stranger. Like someone outmatched. Why wouldn't he say something? She whispered. Because he didn't need to, Dylan said. You already said everything for him the moment you brought me into the room. Susan didn't reply. She was still staring at her own eyes, trying to remember when she stopped recognizing the man in the house across the hall. And when she stopped realizing that maybe he never needed to raise his voice. Because the quiet ones, they're the ones who sign papers with one hand and rearrange your entire life with the other. The house on Lexington Ridge had always been Susan's trophy. The way she gave guests the tour, sweeping arms, dramatic pauses, casual mentions of the beams were imported from Italy. You'd think she'd drafted the blueprints herself. Never mind that Paul was the one who refinished every floorboard, custom-built the cabinetry, and drove 8 hours to pick up the exact granite slab she claimed just appeared in the remodel. What she didn't know, what she never once thought to ask, was whose name was actually on the deed. While she sat by the bay window scrolling Pinterest for modern moody farmhouse inspiration, Paul was driving north. Not to a lawyer, not to a storage unit, to a small gray office nestled behind a bait shop, marked only by a crooked mailbox with no name. Inside sat Elaine. Late 50s, sharp glasses, sharper mind. She didn't ask how he was. She never did. You're late, she said, flipping through the trust binder already open on her desk. Traffic, Paul said with a tired grin. She slid a form toward him. This is the last step. Once we file this amendment, the title's completely sealed until the end of the lock period. Which means, she can't touch it, he finished. Not now? Not in 5 years. Elaine nodded. It's already retroactive. Original title date puts it outside marital acquisition. Paul signed. No hesitation. She clipped the document into a folder, placed it in a pre-stamped envelope, and tapped her nails once. Done. Back at the house, Susan was on hold with the county clerk's office, her finger tapping a wine glass like a telegraph machine. The walls around her were suddenly too quiet, too large, too not hers. When the clerk finally picked up, Susan launched in. I'm calling to confirm a real estate title. My husband may have filed something unauthorized. Clerk, what's the property address? She gave it. Clicking. Typing. I'm sorry, ma'am. There's no current title transfer in your name. No, she said, pinching the bridge of her nose. I mean a recent transfer from my name. Like if he tried to override. There is no record of you ever holding title. The property's held under a closed trust. Has been for 1 moment. More clicking. 6 years. Susan froze. What do you mean 6 years? I live here. I've renovated here. Yes, ma'am. But you've never owned it. Not according to our records. Click. Dial tone. Susan stood in the center of the open concept living room she thought she ruled, surrounded by carefully curated artifacts of a life she assumed was secured. Candles arranged in odd numbers, decorative bowls with nothing inside them, $2,000 rugs no one was allowed to step on. None of it mattered. None of it was hers. The illusion cracked. She threw her phone at the wall. It bounced off with a dull thud. She stormed to the study, yanked open the filing cabinet. Empty. No deed. No paperwork. Just a yellowed Home Depot receipt and a half-eaten mitt. The framed wedding photo stared at her from the bookshelf. Paul's eyes suddenly looked like they knew something. Knew everything. She screamed. Not the dramatic kind. The guttural, choking kind. Like her lungs were trying to spit out the truth too late. In the gray office 2 hours north, Elaine glanced at Paul's hand. He was holding his wedding ring between 2 fingers. You keeping it? Paul smiled faintly. Not anymore. He dropped it into the shred bin beside the desk. It landed with a soft clink, barely audible. Elaine looked up. You sure about this? I was sure the day she walked into that study with a lawyer and a smirk, he said. This is just the paperwork catching up. And just like that, what Susan thought was a shared empire was nothing more than a well-decorated illusion. A trophy case in someone else's name. Susan slammed the Tesla's door hard enough to make the valet flinch. She didn't wait for the ticket, just stormed into Dylan's office in sunglasses, designer boots, and a fury that filled the elevator before she did. She didn't even bother with pleasantries. Tell me you can fix this. Dylan looked up from his desk, face pale, tie askew. Not his usual smug confidence. This was the face of a man cornered by his own chessboard. You saw the back page, right? Susan stopped short. What back page? He blinked. The back page of the power of attorney form. The one he signed. She narrowed her eyes. There was no back page. I was standing over him. Dylan leaned forward, hands shaking slightly. There was. Susan, I have it right here. He opened a folder and slid a familiar-looking document across the table. Her signature. Paul's. All official. Then he flipped it. There it was, highlighted in neat blue ink like a dagger waiting in plain sight. Authority revoked upon breach of marital trust, including but not limited to the presence of undisclosed third-party legal influence during signing. Susan blinked at the words like they were written in fire. Dylan whispered, he baited you. What the hell does that mean? It means the moment you brought me into that study, the clause activated. Legally, your demand became coercive. I was a witness, your lawyer, exerting pressure to secure authority. And now, that document voids itself. She stood there, stunned. But he signed it. He signed his version, with that clause already embedded. Dylan pulled out a second sheet, a time-stamped photo of Paul holding up the signed page, camera angle clearly showing Susan and Dylan hovering nearby. Then he pulled out a small USB. He also recorded the conversation. Her stomach sank. I didn't authorize a recording. He didn't need your authorization, Dylan snapped. One-party consent. This is your house, not a courtroom. Susan's mouth opened. Closed. We can argue intent. He was manipulative. He knew I'd be emotional, that I'd push. Stop. Dylan held up a hand. You're not in control anymore. She felt something hollow crack in her chest. He wanted you to demand it, Dylan continued. He wanted me there. He wanted this to look like pressure, because he knew exactly what that clause would do. And Susan, he finally looked her in the eyes. You walked him straight into a legal fortress, and you locked the gates behind him. Susan collapsed into the chair, staring at the document like it had betrayed her. It was supposed to be her victory, her moment, her leverage. Now it was a trap, and Paul didn't just walk into it. He built it, around her, quietly, strategically, like a man who'd watched her bluff one too many times and finally called her with a smile. Can we suppress the recording? She asked, voice barely audible. Dylan looked exhausted. He already submitted it. Through a third-party trustee. It's not even under his name anymore. But this was just power of attorney. Not. This is leverage, Dylan interrupted. And he has it. She stood again, pacing now. No. There's got to be something. There was, Dylan said. It was the moment before you walked into that study with me. You could have talked to him like a human being. But you didn't. You tried to corner someone who builds corner offices for billion-dollar collapses. Susan's hand curled around the edge of the table. Her nails dug into the wood. This isn't fair. Dylan laughed bitterly. You're right. You brought a chessboard. He built the room the board is sitting in. She stared at the blue ink. 5 clean words. Undisclosed third-party legal influence. The line wasn't just legal. It was surgical. Because Paul didn't need a fight. He just needed her to reach for the sword, so the blade could flip in her hand. She thought she was strong-arming an old man into surrender. She never realized she was playing out a script he drafted the day they met. Susan parked sideways across 2 spots, threw the gear into park, and didn't even bother locking the car. She stormed through the bank's glass doors with that kind of speed that makes every employee glance up but pretend not to. One of the tellers flinched when she slammed her hand on the reception desk. I need to speak to a manager. Now, the man who approached, clean cut, mid-40s, striped tie, name tag that said Neil, had the weary posture of someone who'd dealt with divorcees trying to freeze accounts before. How can I help you today? My name is Susan Tilson. I need full access to the joint savings account under Paul and Susan Tilson. There's been unauthorized activity, and I need to. Neil was already pulling up the record, but he paused halfway through. I'm sorry. There's been a control shift on that account. Your name is currently listed as inactive party status. Susan blinked. What the hell does that mean? Neil turned the screen to face her. It means co-signing rights have been revoked. Legally, documentation is on file. She leaned over the desk. Show me. He hesitated, then tapped a few keys, clicked twice, then slid a printed document across the counter. She scanned it. Paul's signature. Dated over a month ago. She felt her throat tighten. This isn't possible. We live in Westbury. Why does this say it was notarized in Delaware? Neil nodded. Yes, ma'am. He established temporary residency. Opened a P.O. box. Rented a certified short-term unit. Lived there just long enough to meet the requirements. Then filed the revocation in that jurisdiction, which is valid here under the Uniform Commercial Code. Wait. He moved to Delaware just to sign this. Technically, yes. Briefly. But it was enough. Susan flipped the document over. The notary stamp was real. Legal. Impeccably done. Like everything Paul touched when he was focused. Her fingers trembled. You didn't think to notify me? The revocation included a deferred notice clause, which, under trustee amendment codes, delays co-signer alert for 30 calendar days after activation. She stared blankly. In English, she snapped. Neil sighed. It means we didn't have to tell you until today. And today was exactly the day she came storming in. Right on time. She looked around like the air had betrayed her. So what? You're telling me he waited until the clause matured and then just sat on it? Neil nodded again. Correct. She started to laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was insane. Her own husband had moved to another state, not to run away, but to restructure access to their own money, in a place she never even thought to look. Can I make a withdrawal? She asked, one last time. Neil gave a tight smile. You can submit a formal petition to the new controlling party. Susan narrowed her eyes. And who's that? He turned the monitor slightly and pointed. Trust ID, Tilson 7F, Sheltered Trust. Authorized agent, Paul Tilson. Successor agent, redacted. Cosign privileges, revoked. Notification status, served. Susan stood frozen. Is there anything else I can help you with today? Neil asked, not unkindly. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her heart was pounding hard enough to drown out her thoughts. There wasn't a single bank branch, not a single clause, that she could lean on. Everything she thought she could touch, every asset she'd planned to drain, delay, or dance around, was gone. Rewired. Bulletproof. Sealed like a tomb. Not because Paul fought back, but because he never left the door open in the first place. She backed away slowly from the counter, eyes glassy. At the exit, she stopped, turned. If he thinks this is over, she said aloud, he doesn't know who he's dealing with. Neil raised an eyebrow. No, ma'am, he said calmly. I don't think he ever underestimated you. And that was the part that burned worst. She thought she'd married a man who didn't play the game. Turns out, he wrote the playbook. In a state she didn't even know he'd visited. Susan was halfway through an oat milk cappuccino when the email pinged. Subject, redesign timeline. From Lorna G., Director of Operations, Hightower Executive Solutions. She clicked without hesitation. Hightower was her crown jewel client. A full-floor redesign in their flagship downtown office. Marble lobby, glass conference tables, sustainable everything. The kind of project that got you on covers. Maybe even a TEDx invite. Susan, after internal review, we've decided to delay the redesign project indefinitely. She froze, reread the sentence twice. There was no greeting, no apology, no explanation, just a brief line below. Please see attached. She clicked. It was a screenshot of a legal bulletin, circulated privately among corporate compliance departments. Her name was circled in red. Pending ethics dispute in marital property proceedings involving active trust litigation. Subject, Susan Tilson. Affiliation, independent design consultant. Risk level, under review. Her mouth went dry. She scrolled down. Another email arrived. Same thread, different sender. Subject, off the record. From anonymous@protonmail.com. I suggest resolving your situation quietly. Our firm values discretion. A friend. Her stomach turned. Paul didn't leak this. Of that she was sure. This wasn't his style. He didn't do dirty. He did clean. He let consequences unfold like dominoes someone else pushed. But someone, somewhere in his vast network, had pulled a thread. Maybe it was Elaine. Maybe it was that daughter of his with the real estate license and the buried grudge. She Googled Tilson Trust Dispute. Second result, a PDF file indexed to a public compliance archive. Her name, Paul's. The trust. Property discrepancies. Advisory notes. All technically legal. All publicly embarrassing. Her phone buzzed. Another email. This one from Trendform Solutions, a startup she'd done 3 concept rooms for. Per board policy, we're pausing all projects pending ethics clearance. No explanation. No room for appeal. She sat back in her ergonomic chair, one she designed, by the way, and tried to breathe. For the first time, the home office felt like a glass cage. Her empire of light woods and matte black finishes was suddenly suffocating. Fake eucalyptus in the corner. Perfect little clay figurines from Bali. Mood boards on the wall. And none of it mattered. Because in the space of 10 minutes, her name had gone from Susan Tilson, aesthetic strategist, to Susan Tilson, liability. She opened Slack. All 3 of her freelancers had gone silent. One of them had left the shared workspace. She opened Instagram. Her last 2 posts had new comments. Is this the lady from the trust drama? LOL karma much? Aren't you getting sued or something? She logged out. But the room stayed the same. Quiet. Still. Betraying nothing. She picked up her phone and called Dylan. Fix it, she hissed. I'm trying, he replied, voice hoarse. But you don't understand. These firms don't care about guilt. They care about optics. He's ruining my career, she said. No, Susan, Dylan said. He's not ruining it. You handed him the match. He just let the room fill with gas. The line went dead. She threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and clattered to the floor. From her window, she could see the skyline she once believed she owned a piece of. Now she wasn't sure she could even get in the lobby without someone scanning her name and politely asking her to wait outside. The collapse had already begun. Not loudly, not with headlines, but with whispers behind conference doors. And in her world, that was how empires really died. The login screen blinked at her like a taunt. Access denied. Susan typed her password again, more forcefully this time. Still denied. She clicked, forgot password, entered her security code, verified her email, only to receive a message that made her blood run cold. This user account is no longer recognized in the system. It was the tax software they'd used for 6 years. The system Paul insisted on, secure, encrypted, double-backed up with mirrored cloud redundancy. Overkill, she used to joke. We're not running the Pentagon. Now she couldn't even find the front door. She minimized the tab and opened their shared archive. The folder labeled Tilson Financials, shared, gone. Not empty, gone. She clicked into every drive. Subfolders, backups, zilch, gone like it never existed. She called Dylan in a panic. He's erasing everything. He answered on the second ring, but his voice was oddly calm. Tired. He's not deleting it. What? He's relocating it. You're being cut out of the mirror. Legally. That's not possible. It's more than possible, Dylan said, now fully awake. He's archiving every shared record into a sealed trust container. Your user permissions were linked to your cosign rights. Once those were revoked, your access expired automatically. You're saying he programmed this? Dylan exhaled slowly. Susan, your husband doesn't just build systems. He builds the exits first. You were on borrowed digital time the second he signed that trust. Her hands were shaking. So what happens now? What's happening now, Dylan said, is you're being removed. Not contested. Not fought. Just erased. She stared blankly at the screen as folders she thought were hers, wedding contracts, design invoices, joint tax filings, were no longer reachable. Like Paul had taken a giant virtual scalpel and cut her out, pixel by pixel. Then her phone buzzed. A new email. From Paul. Subject, severed. No body text. Just one attachment. An audio file. She tapped play. Her own voice crackled through the speaker. Just sign it, she screamed, the fury in her tone unmistakable. In the background, Dylan's soft chuckle. Then silence. Just static. It was the moment she thought she had control. Frozen. Time-stamped. Documented. Now weaponized. She dropped the phone like it burned her. It slid across the floor and came to rest under the coffee table, beside a decorative tray she once insisted they buy from a boutique in Prague. It suddenly looked ridiculous. All of it did. The curated bookshelf. The mid-century chairs no one sat in. The $4,000 pendant light she'd justified as functional art. Her empire had become a showroom. Beautiful. Hollow. Untouchable. She picked up the phone again, redialed Dylan. Voicemail. She stood, paced, punched the air, yelled at no one, then sat back down. Another buzz. A system notification. You've been removed from the shared Dropbox. Tilson_master_archive. Her hand covered her mouth. A muffled scream. She hadn't cried in years, not even when her father died. Now the tears weren't polite or pretty. They poured like the dam had cracked. Because this wasn't retaliation. This wasn't a man lashing out. This was methodical removal. Paul wasn't trying to ruin her. That would have been emotional. Messy. He was doing something far worse. He was unmaking her from his life. Silently. Precisely. And from the look of it, he'd only just begun. The receptionist at Dr. Lindholm's office didn't recognize Susan at first. Probably the oversized sunglasses, the scarf, the way she snapped her gum like a woman trying to pretend she wasn't unraveling. Do you have an appointment? The girl asked, too young to remember Susan's face from the carefully curated couples sessions years ago. No, Susan replied flatly. Tell her it's me. She'll know. 10 minutes later, she was ushered into the same room where she and Paul once sat on opposite ends of a leather couch, arms folded, hearts armored. The walls were still that soothing gray. The same diffuser hissed lavender into the room. But nothing smelled safe anymore. Dr. Lindholm looked older. Her once sharp bob was longer now, streaked with silver. But her eyes, those maddeningly neutral therapist eyes, were the same. She didn't ask how are you? She didn't need to. Susan sat down, tossed her sunglasses onto the coffee table like a threat. I need to know what he told you. The doctor just folded her hands and waited. You do remember Paul, right? Yes, she said gently. And I remember you, Susan. I'm being erased, Susan snapped. Digitally, legally, financially. He's gone full ghost protocol and taken my name with him. Dr. Lindholm just nodded. Susan leaned forward. Did he tell you he was going to do this? That he was planning it all those years ago? The therapist took a breath. Not dramatic, measured. No, she said. He didn't plan it, but he prepared for it. Susan blinked. So what? He came in here, sweet and stoic, talking about boundaries and forgiveness, all while plotting my destruction. No, the doctor said again. He hoped he wouldn't need to use it. She leaned forward slightly. But Paul, he prepares. Always. You knew that when you married him. Susan stared at the bookshelf behind her. She hated that calm, academic tone. Hated being on this side of the glass. Dr. Lindholm continued. You thought his silence meant weakness. But he doesn't scream when things break. He catalogs them. Quietly. So when the collapse comes, he's already standing somewhere else. Susan pressed her fingers to her temples. So what now? What, he just wins. He just walks off into the sunset like some spreadsheet samurai. The doctor didn't smile, but there was something knowing in her expression. I'm not here to pick sides, she said. But, Paul asked me, during your last session, what it would take for someone to reclaim their name without drawing blood. I didn't have an answer then. I think he figured one out. Susan felt her throat go dry. So I'm just alone in this now. Dr. Lindholm hesitated, then reached into her drawer and pulled out a worn business card. She slid it across the table. Susan picked it up. It wasn't legal. It wasn't corporate. Just a name. A number. She froze. This is my sister's number. Yes. We haven't spoken in 6 years. I know. She blocked me. I know, the doctor repeated. But she's the only person who asked me, after the wedding, if you knew what you were doing. And she's the only one Paul ever admitted he respected, even when she hated him. Susan stared at the card like it was a ticking bomb. She came to one session. Quiet. Listened. Left. Never came back. But she said something to Paul the first never forgot. Dr. Lindholm looked her in the eye. Just because she's beautiful doesn't mean she's right. You'd better build an exit before she figures out how to burn the house down. Susan stood, shaky. You're telling me my sister, who ghosted me at my own wedding, was on his side? No, the therapist said softly. I think she was on yours. You just stopped deserving it. Susan said nothing. She left the office, card clenched in her hand like a threat she wasn't sure how to use. Outside, the air was sharp. For the first time, she realized she had no one left in her corner. No allies. No clients. No money. No leverage. Even her past was circling back, and it wasn't coming to save her. It was coming to collect. Susan had barely stepped out of the shower when the doorbell rang. She glanced at the clock, 7:18 a.m. Nobody civilized rang a bell at that hour unless someone was dead or about to be. Wrapped in a towel, she cracked the front door. A courier in a windbreaker handed her a slim black envelope with a signature tab. No smile, no words. She signed. He left. No return address. No markings. Inside, a single letterhead stamped in silver foil, Aegis Division. She'd never heard of it. She unfolded the contents with damp fingers. Subject, immediate enforcement of asset hold. Reference, trust hashtag 47-119B, the Tilson family protection structure. Her pulse began to thump. She read on. Per protocol initiated by the executive agent and pursuant to clause activation within trust hashtag 47-119B, this letter serves as formal notification of the following. Effective immediately, you, Susan Elaine Tilson, are no longer authorized to access, claim, alter, or dispute any of the holdings listed within the Tilson family asset portfolio. She scanned the next paragraph. It was brutal in its clarity. All jointly held properties, frozen. All shared investment accounts, transferred. All royalties from co-branded design work done under the Tilson name, reassigned. She flipped the page. Page 2. Consulting revenues. Deferred tax rebates. Long-term annuities. Trust purchased furnishings. Even the vacation rental in Vermont, she used to pretend, was her creative reset zone. Gone. The third page was just as cold. A list of all professional retainers she'd used Paul's name to access. Rescinded. Her client directories, scrubbed from the trust's digital records. The final bullet. Per Ethics Clause 4.3.7, all name usage under the Tilson brand umbrella has been severed retroactively. You are to cease representing yourself under that designation in any formal or informal capacity. She hit the last line and froze. Signed, Emery Lynn Tilson, Executor, Trust Aegis Division, Paul's daughter. The one Susan had once called a brat in designer knockoffs at a dinner party, loud enough for everyone to hear. The same daughter she didn't invite to their wedding. The same daughter who'd shown up anyway, in a gray blazer and calm fury, and hugged Paul like she already knew. Susan had written her off as inconsequential. Turns out, she'd been studying and waiting. The name rang in her ears, Aegis. Paul used to mention it offhandedly. My little bunker, he'd once joked. Just in case the world decides to implode. Now it was real. A full-blown legal entity. Managed by a woman who owed Susan nothing and remembered everything. She stumbled backward and sat on the stairs. The cold wood pressed against her back as she stared down at the letter, pages fluttering like execution orders. Aegis. That wasn't just a trust. It was an armory, and she'd been disarmed. The phone on the table buzzed. A text from Dylan. Got the notice too. It's airtight. We can try to contest, but this isn't a courtroom game anymore. It's asset architecture. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She typed, deleted, typed again, then threw the phone across the room. She tried to stand, slipped, sat again. Because what do you do when everything you called yours was never yours at all? Not the money, not the reputation, not even the name. Paul hadn't just erased her from his life. He'd reassigned the foundation underneath it. And she wasn't even a footnote in the new version. She was a legal ghost. Unrecognized. Unwelcome. Unnecessary. The house was silent again, but this time it wasn't peaceful. It was empty. Not the kind of empty that comes from absence. The kind that comes from being gutted slowly, expertly, from the inside out. Susan wandered back into the study. Her heels echoed faintly against the hardwood Paul had laid himself. She hadn't noticed that before. The craftsmanship. The precision. The quiet way the boards fit together without protest. Now, the air smelled different. Less like lavender and teakwood, more like the stale breath of something that had exhaled for the last time. The desk was clear. Every document, every file, every paper that once cluttered its surface like confetti from their shared empire, gone. Even the leather blotter had been removed. No mess. No drama. Just absence. Her fingers brushed the drawer handle out of habit. She tugged it open slowly. Empty. Except for one thing. Taped to the inside, deliberate, centered, waiting, was a single yellow sticky note. Her eyes locked on the handwriting. That tight, deliberate cursive. The kind Paul only used when he wanted every letter to land like a signature. It said, "You didn't marry a contractor. You married a contingency." Her breath caught. She stood frozen, reading it again. And again, like it would change. Like there was a version of reality where this note wasn't the final word. It didn't yell. It didn't mock. It didn't gloat. It just was. Unapologetic. Finished. She reached out to pull it down, but her hand trembled. Because this was the last thing he left her. And unlike the house, the accounts, or the name, it couldn't be revoked. It was hers now. Etched in ink. In memory. Across town, In a diner that still used glass sugar pourers and poured coffee thick as oil, Paul sat across from Emery, his daughter, and now his executor. The fluorescent light buzzed above them. No music played, just the soft clatter of dishes and the occasional hum of the fridge behind the counter. Emery stirred her tea with a measured calm, watching him closely. Paul didn't speak much. He never needed to. Not with her. The waitress poured his refill. He thanked her quietly. Then, with a steady hand, he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a plain gold wedding band, and set it into the napkin holder. Just like that. No words. No fanfare. Just gone. Emery didn't ask why. She didn't need to. She simply reached across the table and tapped his coffee mug twice. A signal. A closure. Back in the study, Susan dropped into the same chair Paul had vacated weeks ago. The one where she'd demanded signatures, control, validation. The one where she'd thought power lived in paper and ink and threats whispered behind wine glasses. Now all that remained was the echo. She looked at the note one last time. You didn't marry a contractor. You married a contingency. No court. No confrontation. No grand revenge. Just preparation. And now? Execution. Final. Quiet. Irreversible.